I think we can kick off. Thanks everyone for joining. Just for all of the people on the call, this is being recorded. It'll be transcribed. It'll be kind of shared out after. To give you a heads up, the call is being recorded. Um, in terms of today, we're here for the big privacy wrap up. It's the end of the year. Christmas is now a matter of days or weeks away. So we thought it would make sense to do a bit of a wrap up and look at what's ahead. Just before we chat through the agenda, let's do some introductions. Hi everyone, I'm Mitch. I'm Director of Revenue at Trust Keith. I'm hosting the webinar today. I'm joined by two subject matter experts. Demi, I don't know if you want to kick off with a quick introduction.
Thanks, Mitch. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Demi, and I'm a data protection expert here at Trust Keith. I've been with Trust Keith for a little while now, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you guys today, having a great conversation about privacy trends this year and what's to come. Exciting.
Thanks, Demi.
Kaylee?
Hi, I'm Kaylee. I'm the lead DPO with Trust Keith. I am the lead DPO, so data protection is my day job, and I am also a huge privacy geek. So I spend a lot of time in my free time reading about all of these trends and different things. And so it's exciting to have a captive audience to talk to.
Yeah, and ex head of operations, I find is always an interesting place to come from as well. You're
Yeah,
one of the few ops people who done data protection and actually liked it and kept on with it. That's quite
exactly. Yeah, I know what it's like when someone lands data protection on your lap and says, "This is your problem now." But I actually really enjoyed it, and I'm very glad that that happened.
yeah, nice. Well, very exciting. We've got the A team on today, so I hope everyone is excited. In terms of the plan for the call, or I should say, Demi and Kaylee, are going to do a review of 2025 and look at some of the main things that happened. It's been a very obviously busy year. We're then going to look at some of what's to come in 2026 and what you should be thinking about as the likely as the internal owner of data privacy in the businesses that you work for. And then we'll have Q&A and basically just key takeaways and things you should think about implementing going into the new year with basically some practical takeaways. So that's the plan for the call. Final thing before we kick off is for anyone who's not already a customer, there's a bit of a mixed bag on the call today. If it's of interest, you get access to a free portal with data protection templates for joining this webinar. You can basically screenshot the QR code, but we will also send these through to everyone after the webinar as well. Yeah, you'll have some templates that are actually good, well written, and robust to get you started if you're looking to improve in any of these areas. Um, but with that said, why don't we kick off with our 2025 privacy review? Who's going to kick us off here? Is it Kaylee or Demi? Who wants to go first?
I can kick things off, Mitch.
Do it.
So, you happy for me to just start talking what I think some,
Well, yeah, I mean, what's
yeah?
what's what's happened this year? What's top of the list from your perspective?
Top of the list is going to be absolutely no surprises.
Oh,
AI. It's everywhere. It's being, injected in all these different parts of our lives, our work. So that's definitely been a real standout moment of 2025, particularly from a data protection perspective. Now, you might be wondering why that is, or it might be very obvious, just in case. So, particularly if we look at generative AI, Mitch, lots of these deep learning models, LLMs, you would have heard that a lot as well. They basically train on large amounts of data, majority of which is personal data, the majority of which is publicly available data scraped from the internet, right? So with that brings a whole host of data protection risks, and it's made it for a very interesting year in data protection. We've got issues with lawfulness. So, can you lawfully scrape data from the internet? Lots of regulators getting stuck into that. Is it fair if even though personal data might be publicly available, it's still personal data, right? It's still protected by the GDPR. So, we have to keep that in mind. Issues with would you reasonably expect an LLM to train on your data if you put it on the internet, etc. So lots
Mm.
of issues around transparency and fairness, accuracy bias. I honestly could go on, Mitch, but I know we don't have that much time. So data protection and AI, definitely a really hot topic in our area of work this year.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I've definitely heard lots and lots of customers asking about like how to manage AI tools from a vendor risk assessment perspective. That's certainly come up. And there's obviously hundreds, if not thousands, of startups now saying they are AI first companies. So, yeah, definitely companies, I guess from what I've seen, companies are thinking about how they use AI, but also the tools that they use as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Kaylee, any thoughts there?
Sorry, I lost my unmute button. This happens to me constantly. I'm always on mute. No, I would absolutely echo everything that Demi has said. I mean, this is such an important area, and I think that, throughout 2025, even into 2024, 2025, we've seen AI being the hot topic that just doesn't go away. It is the sexy thing to talk about, the sexy new thing for all of the businesses to be doing. And I think that it's going to have such a seismic shift on the way that we are all operating that it's really hard to overstate the impact that AI is going to continue to have. And I know that the theme for this is 2025 and looking forwards to 2026. And, we'll talk more towards the end on that, but AI is not going away.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not. It's going to be a buzzword for a long time yet, I think. Demi, just on the AI related privacy risks, are there any key like trends around enforcement that you think it's worth noting? And also like any practical actions you think companies should be taking and that you're advising your customers on in particular?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an area where there's been some key changes in the regulatory landscape. So we had the EU AI Act come into force last year. In February and August, from top of mind, there were some key milestones in that act that needed that sort of would trigger this year as well. That you know, if you're deploying particularly high risk AI, you really need to be mindful of. We've got an ongoing investigation into ChatGPT by the European Data Protection Board ChatGPT Task Force that released its preliminary findings last year, which was super helpful. I'd really recommend checking those out because they do, in my opinion, create a sort of template on how regulators are going to approach these sorts of issues that I talked about earlier. So yeah, and we're definitely seeing like lots more regulatory guidance. So I think we've had the French, UK, Belgian, German, Dutch data protection authorities all issuing guidance on AI. So it's definitely an area that we're seeing more and more sort of guidance, investigations, regulatory action, etc.
Nice. That makes sense. And any thoughts around like practical actions that companies should be taking? I guess obviously it depends a bit on the type and the nature of your company, but are there any like key pieces of advice that you're finding yourself giving and give kind of across the board?
Yeah, definitely. I think firstly, like doing an AI audit, like fully understanding where you're using AI in the business. I feel like there's sort of just been this flood of tools and AI being integrated into existing tools that sometimes the first starting point should actually be like doing an audit and understanding the extent that you're using this, making sure you're carrying out data protection impact assessments. When we're using innovative technologies that could likely result in a high risk to individuals, it's really important we assess the risk of it and document and know when it's a legal requirement under the GDPR to do so. And I'd also say, Mitch, monitor the policy shifts in the different jurisdictions that apply to you because we're seeing quite a difference in approach between, for example, how the US is approaching AI, for example, compared to like the EU's more prescriptive frameworks.
Mhm.
That's a real general statement, but I would just be mindful of knowing the different regimes that may apply to your use of AI as well.
Nice. Thanks, Demi. I have loads of questions, but there are also loads of other points to get through. So if anyone has like any specific questions about this particular topic, please send them through to the chat, and we can address them. But shall we move on to topic number two of 2025, which Demi, I think is with you still.
I know I'm doing all the talking, Mitch.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Hold
Kaylee.
in the mic. Come on. Um,
Yeah, so another key thing we saw coming out of this year is a real focus on children's data. No surprises there. So, particularly with technology being sort of a bigger part of our lives. We're seeing more and more uptake by children using these services as well. And there's lots of evidence. I think the ICO did a recent report that 84% of parents are concerned about their children's exposure to harmful content online, and 75% were concerned about their children sharing data, right? So the regulators are really listening to that. I'd say over the last 2 years, the ICO's had a big focus on children's data, but Kaylee just pointed out yesterday the ICO have announced they're launching a monitoring program targeting 10 popular games played by children, right? So things like, if you have a product that is being used by children or is likely to be used by children, are you making sure that you're complying with the ICO's age appropriate design code, making sure that your default settings are making sure that they're protecting children and keeping them in mind, you're not targeting children with advertising, tracking their location, etc. So I think particularly in the UK, that's going to be a big focus, and has been over the last year. But I also think, and I sort of am coming, Mitch, a little bit into the future, but we also had a big sweep of regulators in the last month come together. There was about 30 of them, and they've indicated that they're also going to be looking into apps that process children's data. So that was a big news story in our world this year, but it'll be something that we'll be following on to next year. So very interested to see what comes out of that.
Nice, thanks. Yeah, we'll definitely be coming on to that. I guess if there are any, say, in-house DPOs or data protection owners in here where their businesses are, say, about to launch new products that are just going to be processing children's data for the first time, what are some of like the key practical bits of advice you would leave them with? So they're just about starting to get involved in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Well, firstly, know what your obligations are. So I would definitely go to the ICO's age appropriate design code. It's basically got 15 mandates on like what you need to do when you're processing children's data. For
Hmm.
example, making sure you're carrying out a data protection impact assessment, age assurance mechanisms, which I haven't talked to, and I might if I have time, Mitch. And it's also I've seen that it's becoming like an increasingly popular policy tool as well. So I think, of course, if it applies to you, you have to do it. But I also think we always advise like look to the highest standard, and I think it'll set some really good frameworks for you in terms of how you process children's data generally.
Nice, thank you. Very sound advice. Any other points you'd like to cover on this one? Otherwise, I think we'll move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say another trend in children's data that we saw this year is more assurance mechanisms and regulation requiring that, certain organizations, particularly if they may have a service that could be harmful to a child, we're seeing more and more requirements to essentially verify someone's age before they access a service. And this has been really interesting because it brings out this tension between, yes, we need to protect youth, but there's also this balance that we don't want organizations over collecting sensitive data, for example, biometrics data, to
Mm.
verify age, and seeing the different approaches from regulators play out there as well, which will be interesting to keep an eye on.
Nice. Yeah, definitely an interesting one. I mean, if the ICO are going to spend their time anywhere as a parent, I'd be happy for it to be children's data and age verification. So yeah, definitely a very interesting topic.
No, Rich.
Thank you. Kaylee, what do you think? What have your big points for 2025 been?
So I've got kind of 2 points that I'm going to talk to, but they both feed into one kind of broader point. And Demi got their sexy topics. Demi's talked to you about AI and children's data, and I'm going to talk to you about regulation. Woohoo! Because globally there really has been a trend towards increased regulation, like as well as like lots of updates to existing regulation. It's really notable, and Demi alluded to this already, that there is this genuine but also really perceived difference between a kind of pro innovation approach that is considered to be a very US approach and the more kind of codified approach in Europe, and different regimes from elsewhere in the world kind of draw influence from those two approaches. And so globally we've just seen this increase in data protection regulations. Interestingly, in the US, and a nation that is not known for having, an overarching privacy regulation. There has been a patchwork of US states that have taken on new privacy regulations, new data protection regulations, so that actually the US now does have a really strong blanket of data protection enforcement, which is interesting, but it's managed at that state level. And what that means is that there's kind of a really complex patchwork of different things to pay attention to. Other really notable things in terms of regulation are India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which, although it's existed on paper for a couple of years now, actually came into effect like very recently, like in November. So, India, huge market, now covered by this like reasonably comprehensive data protection regulation. And so, lots more to think about when you're looking at that kind of global piece. Um,
Kaylee, I do have a quick question for you, which
yeah,
was not planned, but I have to ask it. So it's about the US and it's about the patchwork of privacy regulations that we have in the US. So
yeah.
my understanding is on when it comes to AI regulation in the US, they will be regulating it at a federal level, and they're trying not to do patchworks. And well, ideally, they don't want to regulate it at all. I understand. What are the chances of that happening on the privacy side? Like, surely they see that as just a pain. Like, is there any chance of them bringing it up a level from state to federal?
There have been a couple of attempts over the years to bring in a kind of comprehensive federal data protection regulation, but they've never made it terribly far down the road. Um, there are, I think, too many competing views in the US
Yeah.
to get it too far. I think that it is still, there are lots of campaigners that would still like to see it, and there are still efforts to get there. And I think the more states that bring something in, the more likely that there'll be something federal that comes in over the top of it. But at the moment, it's not on the close horizon. I'd be very surprised if we see that into 2026.
There you go. I can only apologize to those in the call who are expanding into the US. Um, but sorry, carry on. I've taken you on a bit of a tangent there.
Oh,
So
not at all, not at all. One of the things that I kind of noted, Demi noted already, and then I just alluded to was, this perceived difference, US, Europe, codified regulation versus innovation friendly. And actually in 2024, there was something called the Draghi report that warned that the EU's really complex and overlapping laws were stifling innovation and growth. And so throughout 2025, the EU have responded to that by running consultations on what's been known as the digital omnibus, which is a huge document. But broadly speaking, was released a couple of weeks ago. And what it attempts to do is take some of those like blocks to innovation and growth, simplify the various pieces of regulation, including GDPR and the AI Act, to come up with something that's much more business friendly. Kind of headlines from that are a more subjective definition of personal data. It kind of follows some of the things that we've already seen from the ICO and actually some of the court cases from the CJEU. So recognizing that pseudonymized data isn't necessarily personal data for the person who receives it in the pseudonymized format. It also broadens kind of notion of scientific research, some changes to user-facing obligations, so potential changes to tackle cookie consent by folding in different privacy regulations into a kind of one-stop shop. A lot has been made of this. I would point out that it is a long way from becoming law yet, so please don't burn all your cookie banners because you do still need them. And then there's also a kind of really interesting set of proposals focused on the interplay between privacy and AI, kind of alluding to what Demi already spoke to before, that seek to confirm that legitimate interest can be relied on as a lawful basis, which has been something which is a bone of contention up until now. And so if you are an organization that looks at AI, this may be something that is a benefit to business in future because we can codify that actually in certain instances legitimate interest could be relied upon. Again, I would point out that actually at the moment this is a long way from being law, but what it shows is this trend in 2025 in Europe, which is not known for being pro-innovation, to move towards that pro-innovation stance. I would finally just mention one other piece on the digital omnibus, which is around instant reporting. So at the moment, in theory, if you have a certain type of incident, you could have to report it to lots of different authorities. You could have to report it to your data protection authority. You might have to report it through the NIS2 framework. You might need to report it through DORA. So what the digital omnibus proposes is bringing all of that together in what Bird and Bird absolutely brilliantly refer to as a one breach portal to rule them all, which, I'm enough of a geek that that really pleases me, to simplify incident reporting, which absolutely would be of benefit to business. So that's one thing that I think we're all excited to see. Um, Critics of the omnibus, people like Matt Schrems, are really arguing that the reforms are watering down some of the key protections and shift the balance away from individuals' rights, reduce legal certainty, weaken the EU's position. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got people who absolutely love what's happening and say that these proposals are really going to kind of make clear water to more workable, business friendly rules. So arguments on both sides, which usually indicates that potentially some of it is heading in the right direction.
And just two quick follow-up questions. Are there like indicative timelines on like where this started? Is
Not
that,
yet.
that a silly question? Yeah.
Yeah, not yet. I mean, the digital omnibus itself was only released last on the 19th of November, so last couple of weeks, and most people are still in the process of really digesting it because it's hefty. They are a long way from becoming law. Like some of the debates will actually start with the EDPB next week, so we'll start to get some sense on the direction of travel. But really, it's a kind of watch this space for updates.
Cool. I have one more question. I don't want to rile you up too much, but does privacy stifle innovation?
It shouldn't. Privacy shouldn't stifle innovation. I mean, my personal view on it is absolutely not. There is this argument that's out there in the ether, right, that privacy and innovation are opposites, and that they're really not. I think one of the things about the GDPR is that it's given European businesses an ability to really differentiate themselves. Like when you look at the data protection regulations and you look at privacy and you think, okay, well, actually, this is a way to enable trust with my customers. This is a way that I can really build my reputation, be able to build on these things, demonstrate that I am a trustworthy actor. Like as a parent, do I trust these people with my child's data? Do I trust them with my data? Like those are questions that are really important, and data protection regulation helps with that. It doesn't stifle it.
Demi, any thoughts? No, no worries if
I'm sorry, Mitch. I'm just shocked you could ever think that.
I'm just asking what some people are claiming.
No, no, no. No, very good question. And I share Kaylee's belief. Absolutely not. I definitely think, especially the way we work, I would say, Kaylee, the way that the GDPR is, it's principles based in a lot of ways. So I think we can always do better. We can always innovate, but always make sure that we're protecting the people. As Kaylee say, what's your catchphrase, Kaylee? Is it like data protection is people protection?
Data protection is people protection.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
So
also
have both.
yeah, I think that the kind of the crowd that those kind of statements come from, you would also probably find that they think privacy is basically about having a giant policy fest with loads of bureaucracy baked into it, and it's not. And if you are doing it like that, then that's probably the wrong way. So, yeah, thanks. Another tangent. Let's get back on track. I think we have one more point on the ICO who released some very interesting breach data. So, who wants to kick us off on this one?
You can
Katie?
go for it,
Yeah,
Kaylee.
Yeah.
I can talk about the breach data, absolutely. So yeah, the ICO breach data is always interesting, and very rarely is it a surprise, if I'm honest. Like when we look at these things, they usually tell us what we expect to see, and frankly, it's quite gratifying that they tell us what we expect to see because the day that there's a surprise is the day that we all panic. But the top cause of breaches continues to be human error. Like it is the thing that we have all done, and if you tell me that you haven't done it, you are fibbing. You sending an email to the wrong recipient. Everyone has done it at some point, right? We don't want to, but it happens. You can have, and what this really tells us, right, is that you can have the absolute best policies in the world, but people are the key. Like data protection ultimately is a cultural problem with a cultural solution, and people are at the heart of it. Like it does not matter, it almost does not matter like how wonderful your policy is if it does not translate into your people being able to do the right thing. And so the fact that that remains top of the list is always really interesting and really important. There are a couple of other pieces that I would kind of talk to. The second on the list is unauthorized access. Now, that can mean a lot of things. It can include social engineering. Social engineering was at the heart of one of the most prominent data breaches of 2025, which was the M&S data breach. I don't know if anyone else had the misfortune of trying to use an M&S voucher during the period of the M&S data breach, but it didn't go well for me. It's one of those things. It's absolutely harmed M&S as a brand. If you kind of look at their profits, they went right down. It effectively crippled them for a long time, and it happened through social engineering, which is a form of unauthorized access. Also, really high up on the list is phishing. Um, Again, this is unsurprising. Phishing continues to be something which becomes increasingly sophisticated and difficult to spot. It's super hard to spot a fish. It's not the old days where you just hover over and it was a 9,000 letter email address that had no relation. Like now, these are really difficult to spot. So, staff training, awareness, phishing simulations, all of those things are super, super important. And, like those cultural pieces that you can embed into your business to help protect yourself against that. I would also note that on phishing, investigations suggested that the Jaguar Land Rover breach resulted from what's called a vishing campaign, which is similar to phishing but with voicemail. So similar category of incident. And the Jaguar Land Rover breach was so severe, I mean, it shut down production for weeks and actually had a marked impact on the UK's whole economy. So, like these things start off small but become really, really serious to businesses. Not as high up, but also pretty notable, is ransomware. And again, linking it back to one of the most prominent breaches that happened this year. One of my personal brand favorites is Asahi beer, the Japanese beer. I am Scottish, but like shouldn't talk about drinking at 11 a.m. But Asahi beer, like they suffered a really major data breach that was the result of ransomware. It shut down production for weeks, and around 2 million personal records were exposed. So again, like a key element to being able to mitigate the risk around ransomware is user education and is those cultural pieces. So with all of those kind of top pieces that I've just run over, human error, unauthorized access, phishing, ransomware, like they are all things that can be mitigated, at least in part, by having a strong culture of data protection, strong trainers, strong training, strong awareness, and really building those things into the way that you operate. So, take away from all of those would it is what we already know, right? Which is that data protection is a cultural problem with a cultural solution. And like being able to really embed awareness and training can go a long way to help mitigate some of the risks of the biggest issues. Last but not least, if I'm allowed one more, it's not very high up on the list, but I'm going to point to it anyway because I think it is worth a mention, is physical records. So incorrect disposal of paper, loss or theft of a device, like these are things that are relatively small, right? People don't on that graph. But I think it's worth mentioning because in this like digital AI age, we all imagine that data protection is something like the Matrix with lots of ones and zeros on a screen. And it's so easy to forget that actually physical stuff is also personal data. Like your paper records are personal data. And if you do the MI5 trick and leave your file on the train, or you lose your laptop or your mobile phone and it's got personal data on it, those are types of data breach. And the reason I call that out is because it's so easy to forget.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to know is who's still using the fax machine? Who, who is that?
Must
Anyone
be
on the
someone.
call? No, someone's got to be doing it. It was 6%. Demi, anything you would add in terms of comments?
I'm just having a good laugh about that bit. No, I totally agree with what Kaylee said. I will say, particularly on the cyber attacks that Kaylee's mentioned, adding AI into the mix certainly has made things interesting this year. I will talk to that a bit later, but it's definitely because it is a bit of a black box. We don't fully know what's going on sometimes when it comes to how data is processed by AI. It can extend the time from incident identification to containment. So that's seeing, and impacting the cost of a breach as well and the harm.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally
Yeah, and I
agree with
think
what Kaylee said.
anything AI is probably driving up the sophistication of many of these things. Like you hear about AI like mimicking CEOs in the way they email and stuff like that. So that's pretty scary. And
Yeah.
what kind of question is so I heard a story from a COO who said her company had a data breach and it was a result of the someone clicking a phishing link and not reporting it. It turned out it was the CFO who clicked the link and didn't report it. So I guess my question is like how it's all well and good saying you need to build a culture of like security awareness. How do you actually do that? Like what are like two or three key points that people can take away to think like here's how I actually go and make people aware that it's okay to report things.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mitch. And I do think to an extent it depends on your organization. But generally speaking, we've got a few mechanisms we can pull on. One is, of course, culture. Like, do you have a culture where staff feel like they can approach a manager and say, hey, I accidentally sent this email? You know, is there that relationship of trust and approachability? Training is a massive one. So, and different mediums of training as well, particularly because people learn in different ways. So you can use online modules, but you can also have a person like Kelly or I come in and give team-specific training that is actually relevant to what they do in their day-to-day. And I think just making sure people understand that this is important and that you have a responsibility in terms of your organization's protection of data is super important. Kaylee, I'm sure you've got so much to add to that.
I mean, not in terms of additional topics, but I would maybe build on something that you said there, which is around training and awareness. And I think that one of the really key points around training and awareness is to tell people why it matters to them. Like tell people what happens when it goes wrong. Like I keep coming back to data protection as people protection, and like how does it impact the business, the people whose data is there when something bad happens? Like make it real, because if it's an abstract, then people care less. But when it's a real thing that impacts them, it's easier to bring it home. So I think the importance of storytelling can't be overstated when you're trying to build that culture of awareness. I would also say, like, that was the example that Mitch just gave was a fantastic missed opportunity. There was an opportunity there to say, look, I'm the CFO and I made a mistake. Here's what I did, and here's how we fix it. Like very often, the easiest way to build culture is from the top. Is to like model it from the highest levels. And if you can model, look, this happened, but here's what we do about it, and here's how I can show you that like we're not going to come and break your kneecaps because you've clicked on a fish. Then actually, what you do is build trust within the organization. So take lessons where you can and like make them real.
So I'm not wondering if you're going to break my kneecaps if I click a phishing email. I hope not. Um,
That makes
um,
them 3 feet tall.
yeah, I don't know. It's the Scottish accent. It made it extra scary. We're done. 2025, it's pretty much over. We've got a month over. Let's look at 2026. Kaylee, what are your thoughts and predictions? What's going to be top of mind for all of our attendees when thinking about how to manage data protection next year?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few key ones. There will be a continued focus on AI. That, as I mentioned at the top, is the hot topic that is not going away. There will continue to be updates to regulation on AI, almost certainly. The different data protection authorities will continue to focus on it, and I would expect that we will continue to see enforcement around AI, particularly where it relates to incidents around the GDPR, because the EU AI Act and the GDPR are interoperable and very closely linked. On the slightly less sexy side of things, around regulation, there'll be a couple of key things that will happen in 2026. There should be some clarity on the digital omnibus and what that actually does mean for European regulations and potentially timelines on those things. That is important not just in Europe, but globally, because there are lots of regimes globally that have modelled themselves on the European model, on the GDPR. So there are equivalent regimes in other countries. And typically, where Brussels goes, others may follow. So there's the potential that we'll see shaping approaches around data and AI regulation across the world coming out of what happens with this digital omnibus. Here in the UK, we'll also get a better sense on timeline for the provisions of the Data Use and Access Act, which made some changes to the UK's data protection regime, which I didn't have time to touch on. Broadly speaking, the UK's data protection regime has not changed fundamentally, but there are a few key things. So things like The soft opt-in for charities, which starts in January, is really important if you are a charity. So absolutely start thinking about that. There will be changes around legitimate interest for things like research. The timelines on that are currently unclear, but will be known into 2026. So some impacts on UK businesses there.
Nice. Kaylee, quick question. So there's a lot there. And so Demi, I'm sure you're about to highlight a whole lot more as well. If we're putting ourselves in the shoes of some of the people on the call who are internal owners of data protection, they probably manage data protection on top of 10 other types of legal and compliance. And let's say you've got a UK headquartered business with a lot of your operations in the UK, but they're expanding into more and more countries. Like, how do you practically, like, how do you manage that? Because it's just so much to think about. Like, where do you start in making sure that you can have some level of compliance in all of the different countries and different sets of regulations? Which I
It's a
appreciate that could be a webinar in its own right, that question. Like,
It absolutely could, and it's a really, really good question. I think that it's a two-part answer. The first is like understand what you are doing as a business now. Like what data do you process? How are you doing it? Who are you sharing it with? And what countries are you currently and do you plan to be operating in? Like that is the first step, is just to understand like what you're doing and where you're doing it. That piece is really, really important. The second piece is like, what are you currently doing? What do you plan on doing? Um, so when you're thinking about what you plan on doing, like what markets are you planning on being in? If you can, it's really worth doing a kind of comprehensive sweep of what the regulations are. But in general, my advice to an organization is do not try and do 10 different things in 10 different countries. Take the highest standard and operate to the highest standard. Now, that may sound like it's going to be tricky, but I promise you it's easier than trying to do 10 different things in 10 different markets. And what it means is that you have a comprehensive, consistent approach that your team members can get behind, that they understand and can help you move forward as a business and really use that privacy and data protection as an enabler and as a differentiator in some of the other markets.
nice. Thanks. That's really helpful. Demi, welcome any thoughts on that. Otherwise, I would love to hear your thoughts on like priorities and predictions for next year.
Thanks, Mitch. No, I definitely agree with Kaylee with going with, the strictest approach is always the safest option, 100%. And yeah, just building on what Kaylee said, and actually, to be honest, what we've said, I think about AI and also the challenges this might bring to your business from a security perspective. I would, as you said, Mitch, we're seeing more AI enhanced cyber attacks. So, attacks at the moment can be quite difficult to detect. They're getting smarter and cleverer. Is that a word? They're being automated by AI. We're seeing, as you said, AI being used with deep fakes to mimic executive voices, but also things like manipulating AI chatbots through prompt injections. So I've seen businesses targeted by that have lost millions this year. And it's just the fact that AI, as Kaylee described, it's a bit of a black box, right? So it just adds complexity and uncertainty in terms of how we respond to incidents. So my advice there would be making sure that you do an AI audit, you know how AI is being used in your business, talks about shadow AI, etc., fully understand it, and make sure that you have a really robust incident response process in place is always good general advice.
Nice. Yep.
Yeah. And I think just in general, making sure that you are documenting like your high risk to your business. So this is always advice that we give, but particularly when we've got AI, children's data, and innovation is sort of moving so fast, it's sort of outpacing a lot of organizations' security and governance frameworks and structures. Be really aware of those risks and make sure that you have a really detailed risk register and you're keeping it up to date. I think I would add to that as well.
Nice. Yep, that feels like very good advice. Always start with the top risks. It'd be surprising how often companies don't do that. Uh,
Mm.
so yeah, thank you. Anything else you would add on the 2026 side? Otherwise, we do have a question that was submitted.
I just add one final point, which is, I discussed it really briefly before, but, the role of regulators. And this is actually, this is kind of out of character for me because I'm not usually someone who points to fines and regulatory enforcement, but there have been some really interesting trends in 2025 that I expect to see more in 2026. And one of those is that there has been a real focus on technical and security measures from a number of the regulators. And that is in part because of these additional risks around cyber and AI that are having such impact on organizations and on the wider economy. So where we have seen pretty hefty fines are on things like technical and security measures. So a good example would be the pretty whacking great fine that was given to 23andMe, and that was a kind of joint enforcement between the UK ICO and the Canadian Data Protection Authority, which is another trend I expect to see more of, like cooperation between those enforcement bodies. But we also had in Germany a 45 well, two fines actually that totaled 45 million for German Vodafone, again relating to a security breach that was basically because of inadequate data verification for partners. So there were sort of the security obligations and vendor management really came into play there. So the thing that I would take from that is like most organizations are not going to end up with a 45 million euro fine, but there is increased scrutiny on technical and security measures for organizations. And it was something that can impact any business. And I really kind of recommend revisiting those pieces.
Yeah, because even if some of the companies on the call today may not engage with the regulators, but the companies you're selling to will, and I find that the pressure trickles down. It starts regulator to big company, then big company to smaller company, and then yeah,
Yeah.
can
Yeah. And even if the regulator doesn't come and knock on your door, like it is important that you're looking at these things because those technical and security measures are part of what protects you from breaches.
Nice. Well, on that note, the question that came in, and then we'll go into some final key takeaways, was how do you think AI will change privacy laws globally? Another big question. Um,
Oh, I can
Go
kick
for it.
things off.
Yeah.
I think it already has, Mitch, and I think depending on how it depends on the jurisdiction really. Kaylee's already mentioned we have jurisdictions that are taking more of an innovation first approach, but we're also seeing the Europe, for example, taking a much more prescriptive approach. So in short, I think it already has changed privacy laws, but I definitely think we're going to see more and more guidance. I mean, it's very typical that technology generally outpaces regulation. So, yeah, I definitely think we're going to see much more in the next few years.
Nice.
Kaylee?
Thanks. And Kaylee, anything to add? And maybe in addition, any key takeaways for the attendees on the call?
Yeah, a couple of things that I would add on how AI is going to change privacy laws globally. I mean, Demi's totally right. Like we're already seeing those changes. You can point to the AI Act and its interoperability with the GDPR. You know, the two talk to one another pretty strongly. But also, as I mentioned, the digital omnibus, which has had that really deliberate focus on trying to be more pro-innovation, specifically around AI, because it is complex. I think that, and here this is some speculation, but I suspect we're going to see more and more of the kind of lawful basis for using personal data in model training being spelled out, you know, much like we have done in that digital omnibus, and in the UK regulation, kind of pointing to legitimate interest and the circumstances in which it can be used. I think there's going to be stricter limits for special category data, children's data, one of the things that we've pointed to as being a real thing. And I suspect that we'll start to see more of that. And I suspect we'll also start to see expansion of individual rights into AI. So where we've currently got, you know, those transparency rights, those will apply over into AI. So things like explanation, objection, correction, deletion will turn into things that can be adapted to models and inferences. So, you know, like explain the key factors behind that decision. And I think we'll see more and more on that. Key practical takeaways. Specifically, I mean, I would just point back to what Demi has already said. Like, know what AI is being used in your organization. Do an AI audit, record which AI systems you're using and the types of data that they're using. Um, if you can and if it is appropriate, have an AI amnesty where you say, we might have told you that you're not supposed to be doing this, but what are you actually doing? You know, make sure that you can, as far as possible, understand the use of shadow AI in your organization. Because if your employees are doing something that they're not telling you about, you cannot control it. It's really important to have a full understanding of the picture, and you may be surprised by some of the things that people are doing if you haven't explicitly told them not to do it. Um,
Yeah.
I would also say, like, once you've done that piece, like actually come out with a policy on how your team members can and should be using AI, that sets the ground rules for what is acceptable and actually, most importantly, what's absolutely not acceptable and what they shouldn't be doing. But yeah, first step is just to really understand what is going on already.
Yeah, and I would closely connect that with also like, I speak to lots of companies and talk to them about actually like understand what your risk appetite is because some companies are like AI at all costs. We just want to adopt it and grow, and we don't care about the risks. And you might have your startups in that camp, and then you might have a financial services company at the other end that are like we're blocking it. And like where do you want to sit on that spectrum, and then you can be intentional about it. Okay, I guess like actually have a plan in that
Yeah.
regard when it comes to
And
money.
and like that will be, it'll be your risk appetite, and a factor will also be the types of data that you're processing. Like if
Yeah.
you're processing really sensitive data on individuals, that could put them in harm's way, then it might be a different decision to if you're processing, data for a t-shirt company that's doing a little bit of marketing. Like they're different things. The
Yeah.
the last thing, and it's one of my like pet things, is that I would really encourage organizations to think about the why behind AI. Like it is the sexy topic, and everyone wants to use AI because it's AI and everyone else is using it. And there's this general sense that if you're not using it, you're going to be left behind. But very often, I think your organizations and people are trying to find a problem to fit a solution. And they go, oh, that's a really cool product. How can we find a problem to fix with it? Whereas actually, like the best way with everything is to start with what's the problem we're trying to fix, and then what's the appropriate thing to put in on top of it. And that's maybe a good way to kind of control that function creep that you end up with otherwise.
I agree, and I can just see our head of product, Michelle, nodding in agreement with you. Like, yes. Demi, over to you for any key points to wrap up.
Thanks, Mitch. I think what I would say is yes, we had this new guidance, this new regulation coming in, but to remember what Kaylee just said, it's like remember the privacy basics as well. Like, is collecting this data, using it in this way fair? Is it lawful? Do you actually need to do it? Like, those principles are they're fundamental part of the GDPR, but they're also a running theme that we're seeing across all these new regulations, right? So I would really, especially because innovation is moving so fast, I'd really encourage organizations to stop and think, do we actually need to do this? And what are the risks here? And can we mitigate them, or are we happy to accept them?
Nice. Thank you, Demi.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all of your insights. Everyone on the call, you've got a busy year ahead and lots to think about. Customers, if you have questions, just contact your DPO. And if you're not a customer, feel free to pop us an email and we'll try and help where we can anyway. So, guys, thank you for joining, and everyone on the call, thanks for joining.